Well, this is the original court bell for Union County. It originally stood on a 40-foot bell tower outside of the original courthouse, not the current brick structure that's in place today. It had a number of uses. One was to announce court. Whenever the judge would be in town and he was ready to sit for court, the sheriff or the bailiff would come out and ring the bell to let everyone know that the judge was ready to hear the trial. It was also used to announce when the verdict was ready to be read, when the jury had reached its verdict and everybody was outside the courthouse. The courthouse was not a big structure, so everybody was outside on the porch or milling around the street, and when they needed to come back into the courthouse to hear the verdict be read, the bell would be rung. Other than that, the bell had many other uses. The 40-foot bell tower was actually located across the street from a couple of historic buildings. One was what everybody knows as the old City Hall. Originally that was the county jail. And beside that building was a volunteer fire company. It had a hook and ladder company and really a bucket company. This was the fire alarm. When there was a fire in Monroe, this bell could be rung and volunteer firemen would come and respond to that. Now, this bell was outside of the courthouse until this structure was built in 1886. Now, in 1886, this bell was removed. Of course, the 40-foot bell tower was removed. This building was built, and this bell was placed in the current tower of the courthouse. It continued to serve the same purpose as far as announcing court and the verdicts and things like that. However, this building had locks on the door. So the volunteer fire department was no longer able to run into the building and pull a rope and ring the bell to let everyone know that there was a fire. Also, the new courthouse was a much larger structure than any of the other structures in Monroe, and the insurance company required a couple of different things. They required the city of Monroe to purchase a bell, which today sits outside of the courthouse on the lawn as the Fireman's Memorial. They also required the city to purchase a steam pumper engine. The city of Monroe currently has that. It's in the restoration process down at the station number 1 here in Monroe. A couple of interesting things about this particular bell, though. Really, up until recently, the existence of this bell had been forgotten. It had long fallen out of use. It was up in the tower and it was inaccessible. It was not in this shape that you see it today when we did the restoration back in 2002. It was covered in black coal tar. This building, the fireplaces in this building burned coal. The chimney tops are level with the louvers in the tower. The coal smoke went right into the tower, and when we found this, it was literally at about 1/8 of an inch of coal tar covering it. So it required quite a bit of cleaning to get it into this condition. Some interesting things about it, particularly about the gentleman that made the bell. This is a French design bell. We know that by the yoke that's on the top of it. You'll see that the yoke, the pinions on the yoke are very high on the bell. That's classic French design. Also, the top of this yoke is nice and flat. You don't see that very often. Again, it's classic French design. English bells are bells designed after the traditional English way of making bells or founding bells, the yoke would be much longer. It would come down on the side, making the center of gravity for the swing more even or equal. So that's a major difference in this particular bell. As you notice, this bell was cast by J. Bernhard and Company at 78 North 6th Street in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1857. That makes this bell extremely unique. There are not a lot of bells that survived the Civil War and the World Wars, the scrap metal drives that occurred in the World Wars. There are just not a lot of these bells that survived. Being 1857, that places it prior to the Civil War. One of the unique features of this bell is the crown. In 1860, there was a change in the way bells were made. And bells had a bolt. All bells that were founded after 1860 had a bolt that goes through the center, had a big nut on the top, and those bells after 1860 are referred to as rotary bells. And the reason for that is that once a bell swings and the clapper strikes the bell in one spot over and over and over and over and over, the tone becomes flat. Now, when these bells are used in carillons or used in churches in conjunction with other bells, the fact that they're in tone or out of tone becomes very critical. With the rotary bell, the bell could just be rotated on the bolt, and it just had to be rotated an inch away from the flat spot that had occurred, causing it to go out of tone, and the bell would be right back in tone. This particular bell is not a rotary bell. It has a solid bronze post that comes up through the top of the crown. This is the crown. Comes up to the top of the crown. The yoke slides into or onto the post, like a joint and mortar type of an arrangement with a pin through it. A couple of things about Mr. Bernhard. He was born in 1816. We had, when we were doing some research on this bell, we had the assistance of the Atwater Museum of History in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They actually had an intern do quite a bit of research for us. As it turns out, there are only 19 of these bells, or bells like this one, that were cast by Mr. Bernhard during this period of time that are known to exist today. There's only one other in North Carolina that's known to exist, and that's in Wilmington. And it stands outside of the Seaboard Railroad Museum. And it was actually the bell that was rung to announce the arrival of trains or the departure of trains, things like that. But if you go to Wilmington and go to the Seaboard Museum, you'll see a bell similar to this. It's much, much larger outside that museum. Again, Mr. Bernhard was born in 1816 in France. He immigrated to the United States. He was an apprentice for a bell founder in Philadelphia. And at age 29, he began his own bell foundry. That was 1845. His foundry, his original foundry, was across the street from Benjamin Franklin's house on what was known as High Street. And High Street was the street that ran from Independence Hall to the docks on the river in Philadelphia. So it was a lot of commerce that went on that street. It was later renamed Market Street. So Bernhard not only had a foundry to cast bells, but he also casted the brass and bronze fittings for ships that were needed to be replaced as any other type of metalwork that was needed around town. Again, across the street from Ben Franklin's house, during that period of time, he was at that location from 1845 to the summer of 1857. During that period of time, one of the more notable things that he did was he recast what was called the Sister Liberty Bell. That was the replacement bell for the original Liberty Bell, which had cracked. At the time, everyone knows the story of the Liberty Bell. It was cast in white. It was cast in England, and it came over, and the first time they rang it, it cracked. It was recast in Philadelphia by Pass and Stowe. At the same time that recasting was taking place, the Founding Fathers ordered another bell for Philadelphia from England, and when that bell came, it was of no better quality than what Pass and Stowe had created, and so they kept the Pass and Stowe bell. That's the bell we know today as the Liberty Bell. The other bell, the replacement bell, went into a church in Philadelphia that was later, that church later burned, and that bell was damaged in the fire. It was recast by Joseph Bernhard in 1847. It's known as the Liberty Bell. It's housed at Villanova University, and if you look at a picture of that bell, it is larger than this bell, but it is identical to this bell. It has the same shape, it has the same number of rings. The inscription, of course, is different. It's around the top of the bell. Otherwise, it is identical to this bell. Joseph Bernhard moved his foundry in the summer of 1857, and this too, 78 North 6th Street, this location is 2 blocks in front of Independence Hall in Philadelphia. So we know where this bell was cast, we know the date, so we know that this was one of the first bells that was cast in Bernhard's second foundry location. Bernhard continued to cast bells until about 1880, and then there are no records of him after that time. So this is a very unique piece. It has a great deal of significance, not only here in Union County, but I think tying back to the founding of our country and as far as the infancy of our country, the fact that it's in the same shape of the Sister Liberty Bell, I think, gives it special significance. This is the original clock tower mechanism. It was purchased in March of 1903. It is an E. Howard number 2. There were several clock makers, tower clock makers, around the turn of the century. Howard was one, Seth Thomas was another. The Howard clocks were known for their exceptional quality. Seth Thomas clocks are very prevalent throughout the South, but the Howard clocks are less prevalent through the South and really more through the northern states. So there are a few of these in the South that are currently in operation, a very few of them, but there were even fewer of these than there were of the Seth Thomas clocks. A couple of things about the clock mechanism itself. Originally, this building was built to have a tower clock in it. So in 1886, the tower was put in place. You know, everything was ready for the clock. And no one really knows why there was not a clock installed at that time. But around the turn of the century, 1900, there was a Presbyterian minister in town, and he was concerned that on Sunday morning, the churches through downtown Monroe all seemed to ring their bells at a different time for the congregation to meet. I believe that back in that time, you know, church services all started at the same time, and apparently there was that ringing of bells while one preacher was trying to preach or was causing a little bit of frustration on some people's parts. And the fact that there was no central time or central source of time in Monroe, you know, concerned him. So he approached the county commission and the city fathers at that time about purchasing a clock and a bell and putting that into the tower. The pastor used his arts of persuasion to secure the funding for that, and in 1904, or later in 1903, it was ordered. In 1904, the mechanism and the bell were actually installed. A couple of things about this mechanism. You know, tower clocks are very intricate pieces of machinery. One thing that I've come to appreciate is how finely tuned they are, how balanced they are. The engineering on these things for, you know, it being 1900 is really remarkable. They were built to withstand time. And one of the things that I've also come to appreciate is that, you know, today we have electronic timekeeping. We expect very precise time. You know, we have digital watches. We have, you know, timekeeping that is very precise. And while timekeeping can be precise on a tower clock, this is a mechanical mechanism. And things like changes in humidity affect whether the clock runs faster or slower. So it does have some really unique qualities. This particular clock has to be wound once a week. This is a 7-day clock. It has what we call 2 time trains that I'll show you in just a moment. But this is the handle, the winding handle. You have to wind to one side of the clock, and that operates all of the clock hands. You wind the other side of the clock, and that operates a bell strike. So this particular model not only keeps time, but at the top of the hour and the half hour, it will release this mechanism to strike a bell at that time. This particular clock is a serial number 2302. When it was installed, it's hard to get a mental picture of exactly how this clock sits in the tower. The clock tower itself is about 60 feet tall. It has 3 levels. The clock mechanism itself sits on the middle level. Above the clock, coming out of this gear here, is a shaft that goes up through the floor and operates the clock hands. Coming out of this side of the mechanism is a cable that goes through the floor to the bell that's at the bottom, that's at the first level, and the clock strikes the bell down there. So you have the bell on the first level, the clock on the second level, and the clock hands on the third level. One of the reasons that this mechanism sits on the second level is the pendulum. The pendulum, if I can show you that, this pendulum stands about 8 feet long. It's a heart cherry shaft. It's perfectly straight even after being in the elements all these years. And it has a 75-pound bob on the bottom. Now, this shaft would hang from a piece of spring steel here through the floor. And then, just like you would see in a grandfather's clock, it swings back and forth at a really a very small arc. That runs the clock. In order to speed up the clock or adjust the time, this knob, you would either turn it one way to raise the level of the pendulum, creating a smaller arc and speeding the clock up, or you would turn it the other way, lowering the pendulum, slowing the arc down, and slowing the clock down. This is a copy of the directions for the care of the tower clock. This is an original copy. It talks about how to regulate it and how to oil it and those types of things. Today, again, we are familiar with how to push a button and how to program things, but how to regulate a tower clock has its own nuances, and it's a really unique way of oiling it and keeping it in shape. But this tells how to do it. We wanted to rotate the clock to give you a better view of what it looks like from this side. I mentioned a minute ago that it has what's called trains. This is the time train or the time drum. This would have a heavy steel cable wrapped around it. It wraps about 35 times, so that when this clock gets wound, you're turning that handle about 35 times to lift a 300-pound weight that's on a pulley system in order to completely wind this thing. As you can see, there are a number of different gears on this particular clock. Unfortunately, about 1950, this clock, a number of the gears were removed and some electric motors were installed. We've taken those off and whatnot, but electric motors were installed to drive the clock itself so that it did not have to be wound. The result of that was that this mechanism was never meant to be force-driven by an electric motor. Remember a few minutes ago I mentioned that one of the things that I've been really impressed with is how well engineered these things are and how balanced they are. The result of being force-driven for 30 years by an electric motor was that the clock was worn out. The pieces that were removed, we have never been able to locate. So we have some of the pieces, but not all of them. Everyone's familiar with the wristwatch, and the little stem on the wristwatch that you pull out and you turn to either wind or set your time. And believe it or not, a tower clock is similar to that. To set the time on the tower clock, you simply pull the stem, and I'll change hands here, and at the same time you pull the stem, you rotate the mechanism so that it comes into the correct time. One of the things I'll show you in a minute is there's a small dial on this side that tells you exactly where on the clock face the hands are. But again, just like the wristwatch, you just pull the stem, rotate it, and oddly enough, you can rotate the clock. And you think about this. There are 4 different clock faces that this one mechanism operates. This machine is so well balanced in that when you pull the stem and rotate it, you can do it with virtually one finger. Again, this is the time train. The big drum in the back that you may see right there also has a cable that runs out the back side, and that is the strike train. When the clock reaches the top of the hour, it trips a trigger, and this is the trigger. It will trip the trigger, it will set the trigger, and then it will trip it. When it trips the trigger, it will release that drum to start moving, and when that drum moves, the bell strikes. It's a pretty ingenious piece of equipment. In this view of the tower clock, I referenced the small dial that when you're in the clock room, inside the clock, you have to know where the hands are on the outside, and this is how you do that. When you're setting the time, when you pull the stem and set the time, you look at this dial, and that will tell you where the hands are on the outside of the clock. Now, one of the things that I always had a question about is, how does this clock know how many times to strike the bell? Well, it knows because of this piece of metal right here that's called a snail. And you'll see that on this snail, there's some deep grooves and some really short grooves. Well, the deep groove, when the clock is lined up with the deep groove, the bell will strike 12 times. When it's lined up with this one, it's 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay? So a minute ago, I mentioned that when the clock reaches the top of the hour, it sets a trigger and then it trips a trigger. So when it sets the trigger, this raises and this slides down, and that drops. So as the strike train turns, this cog actually picks up every one of those clicks, and every one of those clicks, this clock's going to strike one time until it gets all the way to the end, and this trigger drops, and when it drops, the clock shuts off, and it's done till the next hour. And that's how a tower clock strikes the hour. Now, I mentioned a minute ago that when we had this piece assessed to see if it could be restored or put back in working order, that so many of the pieces were worn out that it was just not feasible to do that. So basically, we've cleaned up what we had, and this particular 2302 E. Howard number 2 is on display inside the Union County, historic Union County Courthouse for everybody to see. That left us with a couple of options. We couldn't restore this because it was cost prohibitive. We could purchase another brand new mechanism that was equally cost prohibitive, was very expensive. And as things work out sometimes, a gentleman out of Charlotte called us, and he said, I know of someone in Pittsburgh who has a clock mechanism that is the same model as yours. It's in his estate. They're getting ready to sell his estate, and they would like to send you some pictures, and they did. And we were very pleased to learn that it was the exact same E. Howard number 2. It had been in perfect working order for over 100 years. It had never been electrified. We sent a gentleman to Pittsburgh to inspect it. It was in pristine condition. It was not worn out. It was extremely reasonably priced. And so we had it dismantled and brought back to Union County and reinstalled in the tower. And so today, Union County has an E. Howard No. 2 clock mechanism in its bell tower that's wound once a week. We are one of the only counties in the state, cities for that matter, that have a wound tower clock. You'll find one at Old Salem. They have one. There's very few others around the state, but Union County is very fortunate that we actually have a working wound tower clock. One of the unique things about the clock that we purchased from Pittsburgh was that the serial number was only 100 digits off from the serial number that of the clock we have here. So in essence, the clock that we have today and our original clock were built at the same time. I think that lends to the historical significance of the mechanism. One other thing I'd like to show you briefly is when the Pennsylvania clock was purchased, we were fortunate enough to not only purchase the mechanism, but we also had some spare parts with it. We had weights with it and some things that we really needed in order to make our clock work. But some of the things it had with it was the original bill of sale. The Pennsylvania clock sold for $865, and that's basically the same price as our original clock sold for. And we have a picture here of the building that the clock was located in, which was a school in the Crafton Borough in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And the school has been torn down, and there's a really interesting story about that. The school was being torn down. The gentleman we purchased our clock from was able to, through a surplus auction, purchase the clock and the bell out of the school. He and his sons dismantled the clock, and they were going back to, and they had gotten it out of the building. They were going back to get the bell the next weekend, and in between the time they had taken the clock out and they were going back to get the bell, the school burnt to the ground. The gentleman had a place that he used the clock at his home there for a number of years, and then we ended up with it. And the bell that was in the application at Crafton School was a McShane bell, is the same manufacturer, same size as the bell that's in the tower of our old courthouse today that the clock strikes. So we're very, very fortunate to have both this piece of history and a piece of working history in our clock tower that continues to keep time in Monroe. In 2001, when the restoration was underway of the clock mechanism, there was a number of things that had to be repaired inside the tower in order for the clock mechanism to survive into the future. One of those things is that we had to take the dials out, and we had to put new glass in. We had to repair the hands and a number of different things like that. Now, from the street level, the dials do not look that big, but the dials themselves are 6.5 feet in diameter. I'm 6'2", if that gives you any perspective of how large the dials are. These are actual hands from the clock itself. So this is a set of hands, and if that gives you a perspective of how big they are. Now, of course, we have the hour hand and the minute hand. One thing that I always like to point out to people, if you notice this unique shape at the end of these clock hands, it kind of looks like a playing card, like a club, right? All right, so if you ever see a tower clock and you see hands that look like the club, you know that an E. Howard clock is in that tower. Okay? We've been asked, what are these hands made out of? You may be surprised. These are made out of western red cedar. They are thicker at the bottom than they are at the top. They are extremely light. They are extremely light. Now, when these are actually installed, there's a counterbalance that's attached to them. A minute ago when I was talking about, how easy it is to turn the clock hands when you're setting time on the clock, that's one of the reasons why these things are so light and so well balanced. But they're very durable and should last for many years to come. We're inside the tower of the courthouse, and one of the first things that I'd like to show you is the strike weight. Just like in a grandfather's clock that you may have in your home, this tower clock runs off of a set of weights. One, again, drives the clock hands, the other drives the clock strike, or strikes the bell. And this is the strike weight. This weight is about 850 to 900 pounds. It's on a compound pulley system, and this particular weight happens to be at the bottom of the run right now. And so when it is wound up, it has to be lifted some 45 to 50 feet straight up this channel in order to be fully wound. This is not the original strike box. We have that preserved in storage. One of the unique things about this, in 1950 when the clock was electrified, these cables that you see were cut. Now, bear in mind, we are standing on the center of the courtroom ceiling. If you've ever been in the old courthouse and looked up at the beautiful Art Deco work, around the ceiling, we're standing right in the middle of that on top of the ceiling. 850-pound weight. Cables are cut. Weight is resting on these beams from 1950 until 2001. In 2001, when we began the restoration project, we really didn't even know this box was here or it existed. There was a lot more debris, and there's some mechanical equipment, air conditioning equipment up here at the time. When we found out and realized that this was actually the original clock weight, certain things had to be done. We needed to open it up to see what was inside. We needed to figure out how it's to be restrung and those types of things. When we lifted the lid off of the original clock weight, we got a huge surprise, because this was laying right under the lid. Apparently, today we have cast iron clock weights in this box. But in 1904, when they installed the original application, apparently they didn't order the weights or didn't have the money for the weights, so they collected scrap iron from around the downtown Monroe area and put into the box. This was laying on top of all the scrap iron, along with some other gun barrels and whatnot. This particular gun is a 5-shot 32 caliber Iverson Johnson. It is the gun that the term Saturday Night Special was coined after. It has American Bulldog stamped across the barrel. It is serial number 130. These guns were manufactured between 1885 and 1895, and so that makes this is one of the first Iverson Johnson 32 caliber Saturday Night Specials produced. The one unique thing about this gun also is that it was one of the first guns that used smokeless powder cartridges. Interestingly enough, in all the scrap metal that we found in the box, it was obvious that someone went around the courthouse and gathered up scrap metal. This gun, along with the other gun barrels, we suspect were put there by the sheriff at the time. Maybe they were in his desk and he didn't need them for evidence anymore, and he just put them in the box for weight. You will notice that the hammer has had the thumb guard filed off. And if you could examine it closer, you could see the file marks on it. And that would be so that apparently this gun was used in a stick-up, that the stick-up man could put this gun in his pocket without the thumb guard catching and him pulling a Barney Fife and shooting his foot off, or when he went to pull the gun out of his pocket, it wouldn't get hung up on his trousers when he was having his stick up. So very, very unique piece of Union County history found in a very unlikely place. Well, we're on the first level of the bell tower. This is what we call the bell level. If you remember earlier, I mentioned there were 3 levels, the first level being the bell level. This bell was placed here in 1904. It is a McShane bell founded in Baltimore, Maryland. It is solid bronze, and you can see it's dirty. It's not as shiny as the Bernhard bell that we have down in the lobby, because that one's been polished. But if this was polished, it would be as shiny as a nice gold coin. But this bell was placed in 1904. This is a rotary bell. It has the bolt that goes up through the crown, and as the bell is struck, and you can notice right here are some flat spots where it has been struck by the striker on the other side. We'll show you in a second. These flat spots, the bell can be rotated so that it moves it back into tune. Sometimes people want to know, what strikes the bell or what makes the bell strike. And this is actually the bell strike. It is a 30-pound cast iron hammer. And you'll see the cable coming down from the clock mechanism itself. When the clock trips the trigger, it will pull this cable, the hammer comes back and strikes the bell. So we're on the clock level, and as you can see, this is the replacement E. Howard number 2 clock. This serial number 2183. And the pendulum, you can see, goes through the floor. That's still the 8-foot shaft pendulum with a 75-pound bob. I find it absolutely fascinating. This piece of thin spring steel has this pendulum hung on it, 75 pounds. This piece of spring steel has been swinging back and forth since 1903. I think that's absolutely fascinating and a testament to American engineering. Again, to adjust how fast or slow the clock moves, you would adjust the knob here. What you see now is called the escape wheel. This is the piece of the clock that actually regulates time. E. Howard, this is a for the time period, this was a brand new patent for E. Howard. It's called a self-oiling escape wheel. And when we say self-oiling, we would mean this. When the clock is oiled, you would drop a drop of oil right there in the middle of those teeth, and there is a channel that runs through the middle of each one of those teeth, and you can see those. And the oil runs that channel and runs out on the end of those teeth and keeps the clock oiled so that there's no wear on that particular piece because it is constantly in motion. Those pallets are the steel pieces here, again, are original. They're steel, but when they're examined, you can hardly feel the ridge that has been worn on them after over a century of tick-tocking back and forth. What you're looking at now is the strike train. A few minutes ago I showed you the strike weight. It's hanging on this cable here. Again, the triggers, the time train will set and trip the triggers. That will release the strike train, and as this turns, those cogs pick up on this lever, push it down, and strike the bell that's on the lower level. Now, how fast the bell strikes or how slow the bell strikes is regulated by the fan. This is actually when the strike train is engaged, this fan is moving at a very rapid speed, and if the blades are pitched flat, it moves slower. If they're opened up, it moves quite quickly. And I'm going to show you what that might look like if the strike train was running. So this fan would constantly move while the strike train's engaged. One of the other really unique features about the current clock, the 2183, the Pennsylvania clock, is this mechanism right here. Now keep in mind, we're talking 1903. Electricity is just coming into being. Thomas Edison's light bulbs have been invented a couple of years earlier. Things are really starting to change in the United States. I believe that electricity was actually put into the courthouse in 1910. But in Crafton, Pennsylvania, evidently they had already had electricity. Now, this may not look familiar to you today, but when I tell you what it is, you'll know right away. You're all familiar with the small timers that you use when you go on vacation. You set them to cut a lamp on or off in your home while you're away. That's what this is. This is the first timed on and off switch. And it works the same way. You would simply set these knobs. There's some dashes here. You may not be able to see those, but there are marks here that indicate the hour. You would move these around to where you wanted the lights in your clock tower to cut on and off. As this moves around, this turns on and off. On the back side of this is the original 2-lead insulator. And now we're in the third level, or the clock dial level of the tower. This is the very top. And behind me, you can see the back side of one of the dials. That's actually the dial that faces west. We just came from the clock level. There's a shaft, as you can see, that comes up through the floor into this transmission mechanism. From this transmission mechanism, there's a shaft that goes out to each of the 4 faces. It is an engineering marvel that you have all of those gears down on the clock level. You come up through this set of gears. It goes out to a clock face. It runs through another set of gears that you can see and turns an hour hand in perfect time with a minute hand on 4 different faces. That's just, that continues to amaze me. We talked about the cabling and all of the weights. This is the strike weight cable that comes out off the clock, comes up through the ceiling, through this pulley, across the room, then it'll come down through another set of compound pulleys and all the way down to the clock weight.